All right, Eric, I want to introduce you to something from your childhood. I have brought Miss Frizzle back to life.
Okay.
Unfortunately, she's in the Warhammer universe.
Oh no. What do you mean?
So, on the last couple episodes, I've talked about the Custodes Flamer bus that you can build, where you put a bunch of Flamer Witch Seekers and a Knight Centura into a Rhino, move it upfield, and you have yourself a nice little surprise for your opponent. It makes for a great cheap trade piece that got cheaper because of the changes for AOO.
And I mean, it is just nice to have something that's kind of like a fun little trick for Custodes, because like they're not known for that.
Yeah, you can be a pretty paint by numbers faction with very little interesting to do. That's not like read what's on the data sheets.
Right.
So I was whipping up this combo. I was writing out the show notes for it. And I was looking at pictures. I was like, man, it sure is funny. The Custodes Rhino is gold, which looks like a school bus. And this is the Flamer bus. And I was like, man, and it's led by this crazy lady with a flamer. Oh my god, it's Miss Frizzle.
This crazy lady with a flamer. Yeah, that's Miss Frizzle, right? I remember that.
You remember that episode where she comes in and she's like, we're going to exterminate some heretics kids?
Yeah, definitely remember that one from my childhood.
Oh no, not again.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to introduce you to the Magic School Bus. Let's start things off with our character. We need a Knight Centura. This will be Miss Frizzle. Luckily, the build is only 50 points plus 2 CP, so you can do your Relic and Warlord trait to make the character profile.
Okay.
Very affordable in Custodes.
I was like, that's like basically nothing.
A Custodian can cost more.
Yeah.
So the first thing we're going to do is we take a Witch Seeker Flamer from the kit. You can kit bash whatever onto it, or you can go like get a flamer from a different kit, slap it all together. We're going to make a cool looking flamer on this model because it looks dope and this is the coolest loadout and it helps her stand out. And then we're going to give her the relic flamer, which is called the Excruciatus Flamer.
Yeah.
Which has a very funny profile. And for her warlord trait, we're going to give her Mistress of Persecution. It gives everything within 6 inches ignore light cover and plus 3 inch to the range of their weapons, which works on the flamers.
Everything that is the sister's tag, right?
Yes. Sorry, it doesn't work on the Custodes.
Yeah. Which we're talking specifically about this loadout, not like...
And then the Excruciatus Flamer has one of my favorite stupid little quirks to it, where it's a relic flamer that upgrades it from the default flamer profile, which is D6 shots for -1/1 for the Sisters of Silence.
Right.
It upgrades it to a whopping 6 strength with -3 AP, and it just gives it flat 6 shots.
Flat 6, nice.
So you always roll a 6 with this thing.
Yeah, that seems pretty good.
And seeing as it's a flamer in 40k, it auto hits. Unlike my new Zinj Pew Pewers.
You're never going to let that go, and I think that's hilarious.
I'm a petty man. So the model itself gives off a reroll wounds of 1 aura too. It's got the nice lieutenant aura.
Right, that's just the Knight Centura thing.
Yeah, which works really well because flamers auto hit, so getting reroll wounds of 1 is already pretty good.
Yeah, definitely.
There is also a stratagem that we'll probably be using a lot with this trick, where the Witch Seekers can use a stratagem for 1 CP called Purgation Sweep, and essentially it's just +1 strength to the flamers. It can only be used during shooting and Overwatch, just in case there's any weird corner case where that's not when you're shooting.
Right, but yeah, I mean, so they're strength 5, which is nice.
Yes, 5 -1/1 is very close to what we're whipping around in Thousand Suns, and everyone knows to fear Thousand Sun Flamers.
Yeah, but that stratagem doesn't work with the character.
No, so the Witch Seekers can use that stratagem, but Miss Frizzle's going to be stuck just having the disgusting 6 -3/1.
Oh no. Okay.
And the nice thing is, these flamers all have that 12-inch range that flamers have, which means she's upgrading them all to a 15-inch range, And it doesn't matter if your opponent's standing in cover or not.
That is nice.
So it's a very good trade piece overall. So moving on from Miss Frizzle, it's time to show off the class. So because we had to all fit into the Magic School Bus, which only has a capacity of 10, not 11 like a lot of other newer factions, we're going to go down to only 9 Witch Seekers in the bus to go with the Knight Centura.
I mean, how many buses have you seen that have an odd number of seats?
When there's that one seat in the back sometimes.
Yeah, if they were like from like the 1950s.
Yeah. This is America. We don't fund our school systems.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So 9 Witch Seekers is 12 points a model, which is 108 points total. So we're up to 158 points. Very affordable.
Which, again, super cheap. Like, just generally affordable, but like for Custodes, that's like nothing.
Yep. And again, these girls are coming with D6 shots, auto hitting, 4-1/1, essentially 15-inch range, ignoring light cover, re-rolling 1 to wounds.
Yeah.
It's a pretty strong profile, and you can give them +1 strength to make it 5-1/1.
I mean, yeah, that's pretty scary.
And this doesn't even get into the fact that I'm kind of going to ignore it on our little analysis here, but there's a whole bunch of anti-psyker stuff.
Yeah.
If your opponent's psyker is on the side of the board that these girls are on, they got problems.
I got enough problems getting my own psychic stuff to work correctly.
Eric has a lot of trouble getting it up on his own. He doesn't need help making it worse.
Yeah, these girls don't need to help me on that.
That 4-up warp charge is too much for Eric.
Yeah.
So there is like a whole bunch of strats and psych out grenade stuff, and they flat out just makes things worse at casting near them. We're going to ignore that for the most part in this analysis, but have that all in the back of your mind, because if you're playing against Tyranids, Grey Knights, Thousand Suns, you know, any of the classic psychic factions are going to have issues with that part, in addition to everything else we're talking about.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's fair to kind of ignore it for now because, like, we're really looking at this as like a trade piece.
So they also have one last ability, which is key. They have a pregame move that before turn 1, after you know who's going first, they can move 6 inches. If they are in a Rhino, the Rhino can move 6 inches.
Ah.
So this is like really big for positioning purposes.
Yeah.
You can place your Rhino with the girls in it, and then when you win or lose the roll-off, you now have 6 inches to play with one way or the other to either go more aggressive or to go back and hide for plan B, turn 2 or whatever.
That's actually really big, honestly, because like you deploy aggressively, and then if you win it, then you get to be aggressive. But if not, you're not just like sitting out in the middle of open field to get shot at.
Yeah, and it's probably one of the like key reasons that while I would still be a fan of this, even if it was bad, I believe this is just a very good tool to have as a combo in Custodes. Like, low point costs, very safe thing to pull off, and if you get a good trade with this, you can end up pulling ahead.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, it is worth noting, all of these sisters are toughness 3, paper thin, 1 wound stuff. Like, we are not going to live if we get hit first. The Rhino is there as a shell in an emergency and a way to move quickly.
Yeah, I mean, they're cheap point cost models, so kind of expected to be not the sturdiest.
They do have a nice little bonus. It's probably not worth blowing in most cases, but it exists. For a single CP, you can use Creeping Dread, which gives any sister unit that you target a 6-inch aura of opponents have -1 to hit until end of phase. So even if they're not targeting the sisters themselves, if they're just like in a melee, you can just use that to hopefully make it so that they're worse hitting into your Custodes or whatever they're targeting, or a key character or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that working out reasonably well, but definitely not the default to have in your pocket kind of thing.
It's not enough to keep them alive against most things that want them dead.
I mean, to be fair, though, like, if somebody's charging you, you have flamers.
It's true. Maybe after you do the overwatching and all that, only 2 of them get in, and you go, screw it, -1 to hit might be enough for me to mostly live through this.
Yeah, probably not really what you're doing, but it's nice to have as options for that type of thing, or if they're next to a character that you want to save and all that stuff. So yeah, nice options.
And before we move on, while I'm thinking of it, this is just an extra thing. Because they give so much extra anti-psyker to your army, it is that slight nudge towards not choosing Emperor's Chosen and instead having fun.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I know you're still going to choose Emperor's Chosen, but fun is an option.
Fun is an option. Fair enough.
So it's time to get into the Magic School Bus itself. The Anathema Psychona Rhino is 75 points. And it's a Rhino. It's got a move of 12 inches, the 6-inch pregame move because the sisters are in it. It means you're going to be able to get to mid-board while being defensive. So let's real quick walk through like a couple ways you can move up board. So in this example, let's just assume you're placing your Rhino sideways on the line for maximum turn 1 coverage. It's not always the correct choice. I don't want you thinking that's how you should do this every time, but let's pretend that's what we're doing. We're being hyper aggressive and going for it.
And I mean, really, because you have the 6-inch pregame, as long as there's normal cover and to like run away and stuff like that, like you should be okay. But
yeah, and Rhinos, they're not great defense, but they're not paper.
They're not nothing. Yeah.
So there's a couple ways we can go about this. We can do the 6-inch pregame move. We're now 6 inches past the line. We can then get out of the Rhino at the beginning of the turn for the movement phase, because you have to disembark before you move.
Right.
Which gives you another 3 inches you're allowed to set up in, so the front girls are 3 inches away from the Rhino. Now, all of the sisters come with a nice 7-inch move.
Which is actually pretty good.
And because all of these guns are assault and auto hit, there's no downside to advancing. So let's move that up 1 more inch, because we all know we're going to roll a 1 on an advance.
Probably, but hopefully not.
So we'll call it an 8-inch move. That plus our 15-inch threat range, because we've got the plus 3 inches and the flamer.
Yeah, default 12 plus 3 from the aura.
That means we'll end up with a 27-inch threat range from where that Rhino is parked at the beginning of the game, if we want to do a turn 1 trade.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty good. It's not guaranteed depending on how your opponent's set up, but again, you get to make the pregame move knowing, like, oh, this is not going to happen. Let's go, default to move backwards and we'll figure it out for turn 2.
Yeah.
But 27 inches is not bad. And these flamers are going to be dishing out solid wound counts.
Yes. And this is, again, like, that's your threat range turn 1. Your threat range, if you're a little more conservative and just move around in the Rhino and try to stay behind cover a little bit, is basically half the board.
Yeah.
Like, whatever side of the board you set them up on, you can go all the way to the back with that.
Yeah, I mean, all depending on, how the terrain layout is and stuff like that. But essentially, you should be able to turn 2 cover the half of the board.
And now, this would mean nothing if they hit like a wet noodle.
That's true. That's true.
But the whole trick is costing us 233 points, which is like, what, half of 1 Custodes model?
Something like that, basically, yeah.
If you wanted to like double up and really go all in as a theme on this, like let's say you've got a bunch of sprues of Sisters of Silence sitting around that you've never really had use for.
And for some reason you have 2 rhinos.
Everyone has 2 rhinos, they're free.
Yeah.
But you could pay an extra like 195 points for that second Rhino with 10 Witch Seekers in it. And that's still like well less than a quarter of your list on what is essentially a gigantic trade piece. Like, it's getting to Death Star territory. But I don't think going that deep on this is correct. I prefer having it as that 233 points, just having a good threatening trade piece in what is already a very sticky, hard to move army. It's a nice accent to what the rest of your list is.
And if you had a second one, if you're moving them both together, then you kind of lose some of the flexibility in the army because you're just not going to have enough other models on the other sides.
If you move them apart, you start losing all of the buff. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I could see it. It could be interesting, but I think the first one, the 233 points with the character and the 9 Witch Seekers, is a pretty compelling option at the moment.
Yeah, and it is cheaper, including the Rhino in this, than just running 10 rubrics with flamers, which is another threatening build that Thousand Sun players are familiar with.
Yeah.
I know those flamers can get buffed to Kingdom Come, but this is cheaper and includes a Rhino. If you include the Rhino in rubrics, we're off by like 100 points.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. The Flamer Ball is still the Flamer Ball kind of thing.
So we do have to talk about the damage output for what we're doing with this.
Right.
If you pointed at any like guard or elf equivalent, you can just remove the models. It's not statistically worth rolling dice. It's a lot of damage.
Fair enough.
I think like if you pointed it at guarded on average, just the 9 girls is 23 removed guard models. Like,
wow.
You can split fire 4 and 5 and remove 2 whole units, and then Miss Frizzle comes out with the big gun and removes another half a unit.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense, I guess. Like flamers and their chaff removal.
So guard equivalent, or if you go into like any of the T3 elves, stuff like that, you don't even have to blow your CP on giving them a strength. Not worth it. Whatever you pointed at is dead. If we're moving up in the world and talking about Space Marine equivalents, so, all of us.
Yeah, I was like basically everybody else.
I didn't like get into if you add all is dust and stuff like that into my equations, but let's just talk about the basic Primaris Marine.
Yeah.
If we're shooting into Marine equivalents, you do approximately 9 to 10 wounds with the Witch Seekers.
Well, it's not bad.
If you add the strat into it, it jumps up to like 12 to 13 wounds, and you end up with like an 80% chance to kill 5 Marines.
That's not bad.
No, it's pretty good. And like this, for the most part, gets rid of whatever is on that side of the board, be it like, 5 of their troops or like your interceptors or something that are trying to get out there.
And that's just the 9 Witch Seekers. That's not including Miss Frizzle.
Yeah, Miss Frizzle's going to add a bit more onto that.
Yeah.
She actually does a healthy dose. She's at least a whole extra Marine. And then like let's move up a step further into like Terminators or stuff wearing storm shields. We're getting into like the tanky, high investment things.
Right.
If you trade into these, you're getting 2 or 3 dead Terminators. It's like right on the line of 8 to 9 wounds.
Okay.
And Miss Frizzle adds an entire extra Terminator to the barbecue.
Right. I mean, that makes sense because she's got strength 6.
Yeah, we're talking about like just about 4 dead Terminators on average.
That's pretty good, dude.
And that's a lot to take away with. I mean, like, we're calling it 233 points, right?
And some CP, but...
Sure. But we're calling it that, but we're ignoring the fact that the Rhino is just that turn 1 trick, and now the Rhino can go park on a point somewhere.
Sure, yeah.
So, like, the actual girls who are risking their lives aren't even worth that.
Yeah, they're like 100 points and then 50 or whatever for the character.
Yeah, so it's real easy to end up positive in the trade. And then if they end up charging you, you have Flamer Overwatch.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, even, like, you cut them down by 3 or 4 termies. And then what are they going to do? Charge you? Like, that seems like a bad idea.
Yeah, and it's probably worse for them to charge with a fresh unit.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, at least sacrifice the rest of the termies and then get in with, like 5 more Marines to sweep the girls up.
Yeah, that all seems great, but, like, what about against, like, the tanks? Like,
So this isn't what I would use this for, but, like, quick math, if you do them against, like, a knight, a full knight, they'll take 7 wounds off it, just with the girls. Miss Frizzle does another 1 or 2.
It's not awful.
It's not bad, but that's not what they're here for. You have the rest of your army to be dealing with other things. These are for making key trades.
Yeah.
From a very, like, safe and flexible spot in your list.
It actually altogether does seem fairly compelling just because the investment is so minimal that, like, even if it doesn't really work, you'll have enough rest of the army points to, like, shore up any issues. And, I mean, 230 points, like, Rhinos are not the most defensive, but, like, if they're killing that, they had to use something. So...
Yeah, and it's got a big hitbox, like, it's going to eat up a lot of real estate. It can be used to block off a lane and force them to deal with it.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of stuff you can do Rhino-wise that's clever, but usually isn't worth running a Rhino for. But if you're doing it in combination with using it to safely move the girls around and make this a very safe trade piece, then it gains a lot of ground.
Yeah, I mean, that is actually an interesting little trick that Custodes can do, especially given that, like, generally Custodes I'm looking at as just like, oh, they're, tough to remove, annoying, but they don't have that many models, so whatever. Having some cheap trade pieces can definitely be annoying.
Yeah, and it is also worth remembering this is basically like shield host agnostic. It doesn't care about the rest of your list. Like, this is just in addition.
Right, because the Anathema, Psychana, whatever, they like exist separately from everything else, basically.
Yeah, they're a faction within a faction. It's kind of like when you're mixing in Drukhari.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about the whole Miss Frizzle wielding a Excruciatus Flamer. So for some reason, it doesn't really mesh with my childhood memories of who Miss Frizzle is, but I do think it's hilarious. So I'll give you props on that.
All right, this was really fun to put together for you guys. I hope you all enjoyed having another character build episode. If you enjoyed this, try out one of our other ones like Edward Noodle Arms. If you have fun character builds or a fun unit that you think deserves having a breakdown episode to show it off to people, feel free to hit us up and tell us about them. Maybe we'll end up doing it in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Hit us up in the comments or, we've got that email.
All right, but that does it for this episode, so let's get out of here.
Sounds good.